Do you want me to do it instead?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But how would that be explained by the other one, anyway?
The other one says that Luke never heard about the three wise men and the star. And the reason why it's not in there is because he never had access to that material.
Oh, he never had it to Matt either, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because according to the four-source hypothesis, the author of Luke didn't have access to Matthew or the M material. So they're not there because he didn't know it existed, according to that hypothesis. This hypothesis can say, well, okay, I guess he cut it out, but then you got to explain why did he cut so much out. It's not impossible, but it's tricky.
But if that was true, then wouldn't like major information such as like the birth and the father and everything, wouldn't information like that all be the same? Like important stuff like that.
Well, if Luke were faithfully copying Matthew, yes. But you could say he wasn't interested in faithfully copying Matthew. You could say that Luke didn't really care about the star and the three wise men and Matthew's genealogy, and he was like, forget that, I'm going to make up my own stuff or draw from my own sources because I think my sources are better than Matthew, right? You could have said he weighed the evidence and said, I like this stuff better than that stuff, so I'm going to include this stuff instead. That's one way to explain and to hold up Farr's hypothesis. Does that answer your question? Like 99% of scholars believe the four-source hypothesis. Almost everybody accepts that Q must have existed and that's why we have all this similar stuff between Matthew and Luke. There are a few scholars who hold out and say, well, it's clear that they both used Mark, but maybe Q never existed because they don't like positing stuff that, scholars are making up Q, right? We don't have a copy of it. They're making it up. And the people who uphold, like that 1%, I don't know the exact numbers, but like that one tiny group who's upholding Farrar's hypothesis, they say, like, look, we don't like making stuff up. We'd rather try to explain why Luke threw stuff out than to posit non-existent sources.
I was just going to say, like, I think that makes just as much sense as, like if you're going to create this whole other source, you could also just as easily create reasons for it. Like neither of them are really that crazy to do because either way you're making something up.
Yeah, which is, most scholars, I think, would say we don't have rock-hard evidence for the four-source hypothesis. Most of them accept it, and most of them would say I'm mostly certain that it's the right one. But I don't think if you held a gun to their head, would they commit to it with life or death, level of commitment, right? They're like, okay, yeah, it's a hypothesis, can't say for sure. I personally think that it makes more sense to posit Q as existing than to try to explain why Luke left so much stuff out. Like, we only have two things that Luke left out. There's a lot of other stuff that's in Matthew that if Luke copied him, he left a bunch of junk out. Also, there's some stuff that's really kind of elaborate in Matthew, and it's like really, really short and truncated in Luke. And it's like, why would he cut it down to size? Why would he trim it so much? I don't think that the explanations for the cutting make as much sense as the explanations for Q. Following up on your objection, also, Jenny, I want to add that no solution solves all the problems, right? If you take the four-source hypothesis, I can come up with evidence where, for instance, Matthew and Luke are identical to one another, and Mark has the same stuff, but Mark's stuff is different, which would seem to support the Farrar hypothesis. You would expect Luke to copy Matthew exactly and be different from Mark if Luke was copying Matthew. If they were both copying Mark independently of one another, you'd have to explain how come they both changed him in exactly the same ways. There's several cases like that that the four-source hypothesis doesn't solve. There's no solution that solves all the problems. All right, for the most part in this class, I'm going to take it for granted that the fourth source hypothesis is probably the right one. So you'll hear me talk about Q throughout the semester and refer to Q, or say this passage is a Q passage. You guys should be able to tell what I'm talking about there and understand why I might say such a thing.